Okay, so this is the video for the White's Tale for the CAS Study of Poetry 1900s to Present, Seamus Heaney and Robert Frost Anthology, and we're looking at Seamus Heaney's The Wife's Tale. So possible themes: rural life. You can see that women and gender roles in the rural Ireland of Heaney's childhood are explored in this poem. Contextually, we can see that Heaney's understanding of the role of women in rural society is based on his mother. The voice of the poem is not only Heaney's mother, but quintessentially rural women at the time. It depicts a woman who fits the more traditional role of the rural wife at a time in the mid-60s when a lot of women were getting out of the home and taking jobs. The poem emanates a feeling of routine, and this is it's kind of the sense that the activity, the situation taking place in the poem is not based on an isolated event, but many times over years. If we look at the title, The Wife's Tale, it sounds incredibly like the concept of an old wives' tale, suggesting that the husband has this mocking attitude possibly towards his wife, but definitely that the wife is not always to be believed, that some of her tales, stories, have no basis in fact, and it's a play on word associated with lies, and sarcastically dismisses the story as many dismissed women as second-class citizens at the time. When you start to read through the poem, you can see that it's a narrative poem telling a story, and it's first-person narrative point of view of a mother or a wife. It is prosaic, detached, and unemotional in its tone, and you can see that at several times throughout the poem. So you've got the first person narrative from the wife's perspective through the use of that personal pronoun I in that very first line, recreating the routine of laying out a field lunch for the labourers when I had spread it all on linen cloth. Spread it all is a metaphor for her making lunch for these men. But there's also sexual undertones, which draws attention to how women had a role of objectification at the time. Women were objectified, but it also reinforces the immense amount of effort that she went to. She wants to be admired. She wants her work to be objectified. So it suggests she'd given it all. She's put in all of her effort to serve her husband and his workmates. If you look at under the hedge, you've actually physically got a barrier between her and the men. So you've got a physical barrier and an emotional barrier. You can see that this is a woman who felt incredibly isolated, not truly understanding her surroundings and the work done by the men. And the physical barrier serves to reinforce that emotional barrier that she feels. Under the hedge, I called them over, and even the use of caesura throughout that emphasises the barrier existent here. The use of the distancing pronoun them emphasises how isolated or removed she feels from their society. If you look at the hum and gulp of the thresher, the images and the sound effects here, the use of onomatopoeia and the use of assonance as well, makes the wife feel more comfortable. They're childlike descriptions of the setting, which is her attempt to liken them to an environment that she's familiar with, which we can see again with the description big belt and the imagery of undelivered in the jaw. She's trying to make sense of this world through these childlike descriptions. If you look at then hum and gulp and thresher, these are all incredibly rural images and noisy oral imagery. It could possibly emphasise how displaced she feels as she tries to make herself feel maybe slightly less like an outsider in this environment. You've got the alliterative big belt, again, really simple childlike description. It is not a technical term, reinforcing her sense of unfamiliarity. Then you've got the sibilant sounds of slewed to a standstill straw, emphasising her discomfort or displacement, and you can sense through the tone generated here just how uncomfortable she feels in this environment. Then you've got hanging undelivered in the jaws. You've got really violent imagery associated here. through the verb choice and the jaws. It's obviously metaphorical, but there's violent imagery that suggests that this is an intimidating environment for her. She feels intimidated by the masculine world that she has entered. She's used to being in the domestic sphere, being a wife, being a homemaker, and she's had to come out into a world that she's just not comfortable with. Jaws, obviously, machines don't have jaws, so you could argue personification, but I think based on the onomatopoeia that we had earlier, the hum and gulp, it kind of seems more animalistic. So there's animalistic imagery and there's anthropomorphism here, which again reinforces how uncomfortable or displaced she feels. Then you've got there was such quiet that I heard their boots, and you've got really rich oral imagery, again emphasising how isolated this lady feels. She's outside her comfort zone, she's removed from domesticity into the rural outside world that she's just not familiar with. Then you've got further use of oral imagery with the onomatopoeic crunching. And then you've got this lovely masculine image of stubble 20 yards away. Obviously, it's referring to the ground that they're walking on, but stubble, we think of beards and masculinity and shaving. So it further isolates this female speaker in the environment. The environment itself is incredibly masculine in how it looks. If you look at the next stanza, he lay down and said. The fact that he's not given a name is probably quite important because, again, we can see how uncomfortable it makes her feel. The fact that he's lying down suggests that he's got a sense of ease, a sense of maybe arrogance about him that's continued through this stanza. Then he uses imperative when he speaks. Give these fellows theirs. There's dialogue from him, but yet there's none from the wife, who's the speaker, emphasising how this is a world very much filled with male dominance. The idea of the silenced voice of the wife who is submissive and silent. Then he says, I'm in no hurry. And again, you can see this is his world. It's a very masculine world. He feels at ease here. He's relaxed. There's an easy, comfortable reaction from him because he's in his sphere, his environment. Reinforced through the fact that he's plucking grass in handfuls, and the verb choice plucking emphasises this easy manner. Tossing it in the air, again, the verb choice emphasises the frivolity, the fact that he's relaxing, he's taking a well-deserved break. Most of his language is quite superior, as shown through the next piece of dialogue. That looks well. Superior language of a husband who orders rather than asks, but it's important that his tone isn't hostile. He is admiring and appreciative. Some critics actually argue that this is just the wife mapping on what she hopes to be gratefulness for what she has done. Others argue that he is genuinely grateful. The interpretation is entirely up to you. So he says, that looks well. And there's kind of a playful condescension in his voice. He's somewhat mocking here, which reinforces the gender roles. She is presented as this dutiful woman who is carrying out whatever she is asked, whatever is expected of her from her husband. And then if you look at the caesura of he nodded at my white cloth on the grass, you've got the use of parenthesis. And the parenthesis here is incredibly important because it reinforces the woman's role to comfort and nourish men. It actually physically on the page locks in and confines what he is doing, suggesting that she feels, as a female, a sense of confinement. It's something that would have been stereotypically associated with her gender role. It doesn't mean that she dislikes this confinement, it's just stating gender situations at the time and the stereotype at the time. He says, I declare a woman could lay out a field, though boys like us have little call for cloths. Again, he's mocking her. It's kind of a backhanded compliment on how just how meticulous she is. I mean, they're working men, they don't really have call for this lovely, well-presented lunch laid out on a fine linen cloth. But yet, it's there anyway. she's deliberately making it look really beautiful, really aesthetically pleasing, as she would in the house, in the domestic sphere that she's used to. Then he says, though boys like us, and you've got the juxtaposition of boys and women to further emphasise the gender divide. Establishes the distinct differences between men and women. Then you've got the call for cloths, and the alliteration here diminishes her efforts, creates a mocking and dismissive tone, dismissing the woman's role, suggests that men possibly have more masculine things to occupy themselves with, and we've got really distinct gender roles. Then we can see that he winks at her, and you've got the alliteration of winked then watched. This emphasises that he is gently teasing her, that it's not meant to be cruel. And it also suggests that they have a somewhat easy relationship. She's not troubled by her position in the relationship or by the gender roles that are necessarily confining her. The verb choice watched is voyeuristic, and it again reinforces the idea of objectification we saw at the start. You can see the level of detail here and the emphasis on all the action, all the verb words. So watched as I poured a cup, and buttered. So really heavily using verbs to emphasize just how, I suppose, fascinated he is with her attention to detail and her meticulous nature. The buttering of the thick slices that he likes, the verb choice buttered emphasises the fact that she is a really maternal, traditional homemaking woman, and that he likes. There's language of servitude there. He speaks again to talk about his day's work and the threshing. Then he asks her to, well, rather tells her to away over there and look. Again, really colloquial, obviously from a rural environment, and he uses the imperative to reinforce the sense of superiority that he feels. But again, it's not malicious superiority or comical, it's just how gender roles were at the time. And they're both very accepting of that. Always this inspection, so the choice of diction always suggests that the husband seeks the affirmation of his work from his wife, and that it's not a one-off thing, that it's ritualistic. That this is a repeated occurrence over maybe quite a few years, even when I don't know what to look for. So again, you've got her reinforcing how uncomfortable and alienated she feels in this masculine world, in this masculine enterprise. She feels isolated and out of place. She comes from the interior domestic world of the farmhouse to the exterior male world of fieldwork, and she doesn't know what she's looking for. It's not her forte. Then if we look at the next stanza, but I ran my hand in the half-filled bag. So you've got your alliteration and you've got the consonants of half-filled, the f sounds, and further alliteration of hand, half, and then hooked on the next line, so the enjambment there. The harsh sounds created through all of this reinforces just how uncomfortable and uncertain she is at doing something beyond her realm of experiences, and she does it purely to please her husband. Hooked to the slots, it was hard as shot, and you've got a reference here to bullets, violent imagery of war, used to depict this male world, juxtaposed with the civilised, nurturing depiction of the female world. And you've got that war imagery that is commonly associated with masculinity. Again, slots, you've got the use of sibilants in slots and shot, and you've got the internal rhyme too, that just emphasises how jarring and uncomfortable it is for her. If you skip on down to forks stuck in at angles in the ground, so you've got the forks, which is a reference to pitchforks, and then you've got the violent verb choice stuck, which again reinforces the masculine environment and just how strange it seems to her. as javelins might mark lost battlefields. So you've got a simile, you've got the extended image of the battlefield, creating a sense of danger for the wife in this unfamiliar setting. It seems ominous, and there's a sense of looming danger. Then you've got more use of alliteration in might mark, which creates tension and suggests that this is a threatening atmosphere created by the machinery that we previously saw with the hanging undelivered in the jaws. Moving on to the next line, she moves between them back across the stubble. So again, you've got the image of her trying to avoid this masculine world and try to get away from her discomfort. The men, when we flick back to them having their lunch, lay in the ring of their own crusts and dregs, and the crusts and dregs depicts the men as sluggish and lazy, but content with what the wife has done for them. Smoking and saying nothing, and the sibilance reflects their contentment and their ease as they enjoy their break. Then he speaks again, there's good yield, isn't there? And then there's the caesura there too, as proud as if he were the land itself. So the caesura and the simile shows man's connection to rural labour and emphasises the disconnect between the wife and rural labour or the rural landscape because of her association with domesticity. Then if you look at enough for crushing and for sewing both, and that was it. So once he's finished speaking to her, the short sentence emphasises that her role has been exhausted, and that's reinforced through the caesura. There's a sense of finality that comes with that. She's finished with her task and is no longer needed. She is shown or given insight into the man's world, but she's removed from it after she has completed her very female task. And that's reinforced through the next line after that. So I belonged no further to the work. And again, the idea of belonging, the fact that the use of that word emphasises how isolated she feels. Then you've got the verb choice gathered to emphasise the pride she takes in her role, again reinforced through the further use of the verb folded up the cloth. She's a meticulous lady who takes a lot of care in her work and pays attention to detail, to the finer things. And then she went. There's a momentary feeling of neglect at that and went. It seems that charged with this work, she has a satisfied tone and she's content at having fulfilled her role well, but she also feels like maybe there is a kind of coldness there, I suppose. Maybe it's mapped on because of how uncomfortable she feels with being in this environment. This is reinforced through the but. They still kept their ease, reinforcing how maybe these men haven't even really noticed that her role has been exhausted and that she's not really fully part of their world, hence why they don't seem to be giving her the time of day. It also has a kind of relieved tone now that she's being removed from the unfamiliar, and it could possibly suggest that the men are so content that they don't really mind that she's leaving because she's done such a fantastic job. And again, it's open to interpretation. Then, very final line, spread out, unbuttoned, grateful, under the trees. You've got the use of caesura, which slows the pace, allowing the wife to acknowledge the benefit of what she has done for the men. There's a rhyming couplet at the end which has a sense of finality and reinforces that she is content with her lot in life. Neither party, neither the male nor female, are bothered by the inequality that exists within their relationship. More so, they're products of their time. And there's a tone of acceptance at the end here as well. Some people again argue that the use of grateful through that rule of three, spread out, unbuttoned, grateful, is actually only the wife's perception of it, that actually the men aren't grateful at all, that they don't really even notice her role in it because it's expected of her. Anyway, contextually, Heaney, we can see, was aware of how hard women of the era worked, and their prescribed gender roles. He himself may have empathised with the isolated feeling of the narrator of the poem, as he would have felt that he had no role or purpose on the family farm, which is something he struggled with as a young adult, with the decision to break free from tradition and become a writer, which you can see in other really popular pieces of Heaney's poetry, like Digging, when he finally accepts that he he has no spade or shovel, so he'll dig with his pen instead. Um, the poem subtly depicts the independence of husband and wife. He works and plants whilst she nourishes and supports, but they kind of fail to merge completely. They have an easy relationship, but they're separated in many ways. The poem takes the reader through the traditional role of a rural wife and immortalises her role in the poetry. You will notice that there are 4 stanzas of varying lengths. You've got 7, 12, 7, and 9. I think that's accurate. There's no rhyme scheme except for the rhyming couplet at the end of the poem, which emphasises that she is content, that tone of contentment. And the previous lack of structure, I suppose, emphasises her displacement in the masculine world.